quick reminder, each episode could contain some game spoilers, so please listen or watch with discretion. And now, your hosts for the Gamer's Advocate, AMKomnenos, Banana, and Legion. Enjoy the show.
All right, welcome to another one of the Gamers Advocates podcast episodes. Good to see everybody here today. Today we are going to be going over sports, and there's so many sports games that we have played over the years. I thought this is long overdue. We just need to go over this, and I don't know. Do we have a what have you guys been doing lately as far as games? Have you been interested in any new games that caught your attention lately? We'll start with Banana.
That is an excellent question. I definitely fall back to like playing the same games I've played 100 times a little too frequently. So I don't have too many new games going on. I have been working on my Elden Ring playthrough. I spent like 6 hours wandering around and making absolutely no progress. So that was cool. And then I played a co-op puzzle game called Shift Happens, which was actually a lot of fun. I'm a big fan of that one. Played that with our buddy Wars, and we had a great time. It's kind of like a puzzle platformer where you change the mass of your character in order to like navigate different areas and press switches and things like that. But it's a fun little co-op puzzle platformer. The latency playing with somebody in Australia caused some huge problems, but still a good time.
I think you have a double problem there, don't you? You have Australia just being so far away, and I think it's also notoriously poor for high-speed internet access as a country. I think they have difficulty getting access to truly high-speed internet across Australia. I believe it's been a political issue there for the last however long that would have been relevant.
I mean, I'm American, so if it's not in America, I probably don't know about
it. I have heard you pronounce croissant. That's a good point.
Which I pronounced correctly because I studied French for 4 years.
I think you added a few F's in the middle, a couple of SHs at the end.
Yeah, correctly.
I think they have to get the consent of the emus because they won the emu war before they get proper internet.
That's true.
So.
Is that how you say that word? Banana, say that word, please, of the animal.
Emu?
Emu. Oh.
Ooh.
So I've heard both pronunciations, and I've never known which one is actually correct.
Oh, no, unlike Legion, I'm not going to blanketly say that one is right and one is wrong. I'm going to enjoy our division, or being divided by that common language.
I like the idea that Legion has a clear definition of which one is right and which one is wrong, and is going to choose the wrong one, because that's what Legion always does.
It is pronounced croissant.
Yeah.
It's croissant.
Your voice has to just kind of fade away towards the end of the word, so nobody knows how it actually ends.
Yeah. When you're writing it down, the wistfulness is silent.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, I'm in Texas. I'm like a 6th generation Texan. It's very prominent if you hang around me long enough. But
believe it or not.
But believe it or not,
believe it.
But believe it or not, my only nephews and nieces until about 5 years ago are all French, 100% French. They only knew French. They didn't know any English. So they're learning English now. But yeah, that's my wife's sister married a Frenchman. He's a French chef living in France. So
wow, I never knew that about you.
Yeah.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah. He went on one of those like similar to like the Iron Chef things, but European version things.
Join us for our next episode about croissants.
I at least thought you were gonna say cooking games. No.
Yeah, no. He's in a cooking game. Yeah, cooking simulator. Yeah.
Overcooked.
What about you, Com? Any games you've been getting into lately?
I have actually gamed a little in the past few weeks. So I've been knee deep in work at the moment. So I've only had a little time in the evenings for gaming. I've always wanted a game now that's just going to be fun. So I've exclusively multiplayer gamed with friends, the key to making it fun. And we've been playing 2 games I haven't really played before. One I've never played, which is Dead by Daylight. And that's been a lot of fun.
I saw that
Oh, you little minx.
because I creepily sit at my computer for like 12 hours a day.
And the second was Phasmophobia, which I have played a little before, but this was the first time really playing with a group as opposed to just playing with one person and having it as a background for conversation. They are both better than they should be. They're janky. I get the sense they're quite badly made. They don't react in a way you expect them to. Sometimes the controls... It really reminds me of that sort of gothic era of gaming, that Euro jank tradition, where it's better than it is. It's better than the sum of its parts. So that's been my gameplay for me. And I've also, and this is a real pleasure, with a friend, I have seen every minute of their ongoing journey through the Final Fantasy VII compilation. They have already played Final Fantasy VII, the original. Already, I mean, with me, it was their first time playing it. They are now most of the way through Crisis Core, the remake. And the next game on the list is the Final Fantasy VII remake. We're not going to do Dirge of Cerberus and the side games. We're just doing that sort of main line. Oh, and they've seen the Advent Children movie as well. So I'm accompanying them through. We're doing it in the right
through
order.
that.
Yeah. The extended version.
Oh,
So we've done Final Fantasy VII, Advent Children, Crisis Core, and next up is Remake and Rebirth. And it's very, very satisfying. It's a bit like when you show your friend, your favorite TV show, and you spend all the time watching their reaction on the couch. Did they laugh? They better have laughed. It's it's that feeling at all times, and I'm having the best
it's a
time.
very long way of testing this friendship.
That's funny because when you put it in that perspective, that's kind of how I saw streaming when I first saw it. I was like, this is just like me hanging out with friends or buddies playing a game. I'm not involved. I can talk to them and stuff, but I'm not involved. But yet, that's not what streaming is. When you get into like chat and stuff, chat's going to tell you how to play. And that's, it's fine.
Some
You can tell
people
me, I could
definitely
care
will.
less. It's not going to change. I am so immovable when it comes to that stuff. I don't care. You can tell me all day what to do. I'm not going to do it. Or I may do it just because that's what I was going to do anyway.
Saying that, I think we as a group have generally been pretty lucky with that. I think pretty much everyone who I know of who comes into my Twitch streams and your Twitch streams, I like them all. And they're not pushy. They might offer suggestions if you ask, or if you don't, but I don't ever get the feeling that it's just do this. I think we've been very lucky with that.
I have a tag that says backseating encouraged. Try it. I don't care.
Yeah, feel free to backseat, and
I
I'll
love
feel free
that
to
you have
ignore
the
it.
tag that says backseating encouraged right after you told us that you will just dismiss anybody's backseating. It is both encouraged and ignored in Legion's channel.
Basically, I encourage chat. Just chat. I don't care what you say.
Yeah.
But there's some people that
Say whatever you want. I won't read it, but you're encouraged to chat.
Can you imagine somebody's like, I don't want to chat unless I can backseat.
Those people exist. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I have
Definitely.
had a few very occasional instances of people joining into my stream and trying to backseat the game I was playing, and then they didn't stick around for very long because apparently I don't take backseating particularly well.
That reminded me of one which was utterly bizarre. And if you are watching, you're a weirdo. Complete weirdo. We were playing Final Fantasy VII, the original, on stream. And at one point, you're in the Undercity of Junon, and you have the CPR minigame. If you don't play Final Fantasy, this is going to sound very odd. You've got the CPR minigame followed by the Dolphin minigame. So I'd just gotten through those bits, just made my way to the upper city, and I was preparing for the parade minigame. At which moment, someone came into the chat and just, in all caps, just wrote, "Tell me how to do the Priscilla game." Okay. And I mentioned, it's actually pretty straightforward. You just do this, and I tried to remember. And then they said, "No, tell me now." And that's the extent of our conversation.
The weirdest backseating. You backseat me while I'm not streaming.
But I like to imagine that they thought like I was the master of this mini game. I must have nailed it.
Well, I mean, to be fair, that mini game is stupid.
Yeah,
It's not a game. You don't get any insight into the mechanics of how it works.
No.
So you literally just press square and then wait until the bar is almost completely full, and then press square again and repeat that process until Priscilla gets up. That's not even a game. It's just
I
a
don't
waste
know,
of time.
I think I nailed it.
Yeah.
I clearly did, because this guy came in, he wanted my advice, my tips.
Watch me speedrun CPR real quick.
But it's always just, you could have just pressed it twice. And it's so satisfying when you tell him.
It sounds similar to the ceaseless discharge fight, right? How you can.
Oh, just the name, sorry.
Yeah.
It just doesn't do it for me.
I was like, I don't know why you're shuddering. That fight's not that bad. And then I was like, all right, ceaseless discharge is a terrible name for anything. Pretty sure I saw that show up in the side effects section of a prescription bottle.
Yeah, I have seen people spend 2, 3, 4 hours on that, and it's fun. It's fine. One of my other tags is a Freudian nightmare.
Pretty sure that means Cthulhu wants to sleep with your mom.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah.
Studied a lot of psychology.
At a very basic level.
Yeah.
Loads of it at surface level.
I mean, I think you'll find if you dig deeper, that still holds up.
As I understand it, it does.
Cthulhu has no interest in you anyway, so whatever.
Just your mom.
No, just your mom. Okay.
Yeah. So naturally, I'm always going to be involved in some kind of like polarizing games, right? I just, it's what I do. But I've been playing a lot of Black Myth Wukong. Love it. It's I don't do reviews. I'm not a review channel. I will never do a review. But it is definitely a great game. There's very few things about it that I just do not like. And there's a ton of stuff that I keep finding that I like. I'm like, wow, this was done a certain way and I wasn't expecting that, but it actually made the game better. And I discovered things that the game wasn't trying to like push down on me. But when I find them, I'm like, wow, I didn't know this was in the game. The other game I've been playing is Star Wars Outlaws. I got a fairly cheap copy. And I would not say that game is fully optimized. I would not say to anybody, oh, you got to go get this game. But it is a fun game. And it's really polarizing because there's so many people, especially critical channels, ones that do reviews, have said, oh, this is the worst game of 2024. And then literally give it a 5 out of 10. That's mid. That's not, 7 is not mid, like you would think. 7 is above average. So 5 out of 10 is literally mid. And if you're saying that 5 out of 10 is your worst game of the year, you need to play more game. Because I can give you 3 games right now that are less than the 5, in my opinion.
That's that sensationalism and superlative bullshit that exclusively happens on the internet, where people are like, let's review the worst game of 2024 so that people come to watch this content.
Well, let's not say it's exclusively to the internet, although I do largely agree with the idea, especially that it's really exacerbated that, essentially like click culture.
Yeah.
I think you generally have to consider that when it comes to reviewing in particular, the bias generally for reviewers isn't towards any game or any studio or anything like that. The bias of a reviewer generally is towards laziness and sensationalism or clickbait. That's it.
Yeah.
And 5 is not a very sexy number to put down. You want to get some clicks, you need a 2, you need a 1, you need a 9 or a 10.
Right. Yeah, I would say the bias of a reviewer is money. That's all it comes down to. You can't be a reviewer nowadays in a review or a review channel and everybody's giving it a 3 or a 4 and you're saying, I think it's an 8. You can't do that.
But that's only because we have to look at just the extra detail then of what about staff reviewers, for example, for newspapers who are probably a salaried employees, so they're not going to be linked to that in any way. What's their bias going to be?
That's the problem. IGN's notorious for doing bad reviews, but they used to be pretty good
I
site.
don't respect IGN reviews at all anymore.
I've got no knowledge of it. I generally will avoid reviews of games. Will rely upon a word of mouth mostly from people that I know, people I trust. That's how I find most games I like.
Yeah, I would strongly recommend that to anybody. And think for yourself. Think for yourself. If you see gameplay and you like it, and you can ask honest questions like, how you liking the game so far, things like that. If you ask me when I'm playing a game, I'll tell you things I like about it. I'll break it down. I'll show it to you on stream, anything, you know. But that particular game, I don't think it's 100% optimized, but I do think it's a really good game. There's a lot of things early on that make it very difficult, and I've read a lot of stuff from the game director that was a mistake. They were not intending it for it to be that bad. So the next hotfix is supposed to address that, but I think they're addressing the bigger picture because it is involving a lot of mechanics that down the road incorporate those issues that are making the stuff hard at the beginning. So if they fix that, it's also going to affect stuff down, makes things too easy down the road, you see. So I think when the next hotfix comes out, it should improve performance, and it might fix some of those early quests that a lot of people have just abandoned the game because of a couple of those early things. But you get a lot of gear, you get a lot of equipment, you get a lot of abilities that start making the game super easy. So now you're just playing a story almost, which is fine because it's a stealth game. So if you're kind of like, you can't just like power through it. So, it's been a lot of fun, I think. And so, like I said, two polarizing games, Wukong and Star Wars Outlaws, I both think are really good games, but Wukong is an exceptional game. It's a generational game. I'm going to be playing that for a long time. So,
yeah, I've heard a lot of praise about Wukong in particular. Star Wars Outlaws, I've heard a lot of people... That is the title, right? Outlaws?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of people who've liked it and feel that the Star Wars universe has sort of made them love it on top of that. So it's a game that they like, but they adore the world that it's in, which gives it that little extra boost as well, which is fine. That is a perfectly legitimate reason to like a game for. But Wukong, which, as I understand, is completely new as an IP, I've pretty much just heard rave reviews from across the board.
Yeah, I think the Star Wars is in an interesting position right now because there are a lot of people who are really enjoying hating on Star Wars for various reasons. Some of that criticism is valid, some of it is ignorance. So releasing a game with that IP associated with it is going to definitely get some kind of vitriol on the internet. And it's tough to kind of sort through legitimate criticisms and people who are just hating on Star Wars because they're hateful. But I will definitely say that I've watched play of Outlaws, and it seems like people who are going in with an open mind are just really easily finding a way to enjoy the game. Nobody's saying it's perfect. I haven't had anybody just rave about it yet, but everybody I've watched has enjoyed playing the game.
Yeah, out of the box, I can't give it a review.
Right.
But I would definitely say if it goes on sale or if they fix all those issues, it's a fun game. Look into it.
It looks like a very competent game, which is a perfectly fine thing to be. One of those 7 games, one of those, 6 to 8 games if you're rating out of 10, somewhere in there. It's a very good game. It's not going to change your life. It's not going to be epochal, but you'll probably have a great time with it.
Yeah, it's not Assassin's Creed in space. I mean, a lot of times people were kind of comparing it to that. It's like it's the same old crap over and over. No, it's not. I know these people have played these games. It's not a 1-to-1.
Also, Assassin's Creed isn't even Assassin's Creed anymore. So, I don't even know what that means.
I was thrilled when they made that change into the Assassin's Creed Origins gameplay. I loved seeing that. Just get out of the box a little bit, break the formula that you've been using. They did the same with Black Flag. I think Assassin's Creed, not quite as drastically as something like Final Fantasy does, where you have really game to game these enormous changes in gameplay sometimes. But I do like how over the series they have really evolved. Assassin's Creed 1 is pretty unrecognizable except for on-land sections to Black Flag, which is unrecognizable to Origins and then Odyssey afterwards. I mean, good for them.
Right. I definitely agree that the series overall kind of needed a new direction, needed a little bit of an overhaul in terms of gameplay, because we had 3 Assassin's Creed 2 games. You really did that mechanic as much as you could. You didn't need to keep going with that.
I still thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's another one of those games that for me would have been a 7 or 8 out of 10. It's not perfect, but it's very good.
Well, welcome to today's podcast. We're going to be going over Assassin's Creed.
I was just thinking, Assassin's Creed, Doing the same shit over and over? Well,
mean-
speaking of doing the same stuff over and over, let's talk sports games.
Assassination is my favorite sport. So,
Yeah. But yeah, we'll go ahead and go into the sports stuff. Now, Com has a ton of experience doing simulator games, especially, more retro and probably some of the more recent ones too. I'm kind of all over the place with that. I mean, I thoroughly loved my Atari Tecmo Bowls and things like that. I mean, I played the hell out of those games. But Banana, I mean, you're the only one I don't know, a lot about as far as your sports gaming history. What can you tell me a little bit more about what you have done?
So I've played sports games my entire life. I've always kind of shied away from like the competitive player versus player sports games. I never really appreciated like Madden or FIFA games that pit you head to head with another player, just because PvP games are not really my thing. Also, I think when I first got into FIFA, it was non-functional. So like players just didn't behave like people in the game, and then the game became very difficult because I was expecting, the field full of soccer players to play like soccer players, and they're playing like toddlers. Like I have 22 people chasing a ball. I'm sure the AI in FIFA has dramatically improved from that initial kind of first impression I was given, but from what I could see online, it hasn't been perfected. I've seen a lot of crazy stuff going on in FIFA games. But I have played those PvP ones on occasion, but I always I liked the more kind of like guide your team through a season kind of games, things that you could do in like 2K Sports, either the career mode or like the manager mode, where you either play as each player stepping up to bat or the general team on defense, or you could choose a specific athlete and follow their career. So if you wanted to choose to be a pitcher, you could build your pitches, practice and hone your stats so that your fastball is 103 miles an hour. That was a really kind of satisfying grind for me. It was just entering into the sport as, a AAA athlete or whatever it is, and then rising through the ranks, earning your first start, and then just hurling 103 mile an hour fastball at somebody's head as your first pitch, just to really set the tone. But I've always liked, so I've played sports my entire life, so I've always liked sports in general, and then sports in video games just seemed like a natural interest. But I do avoid PvP sports games. They're not for me.
So are we kind of like the odd crew where we played both video games and were good in school and played sports?
Well, I wasn't good at sports.
Oh. Just played sports. I got you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it was very cute.
Yeah, so I remember playing on the Coleco, a handheld football game. I mean, I'm not young, y'all, so, but it was funny because there was like 5 little dots on the screen, and it was only for 10 yards at a time. So if you had your quarterback and you had to tell the game if you wanted to pass or run, so the next play, it would automatically set up that option. The quarterback would hold it, and then it was this little dot that looked like just like a football player. Like it would be the football if you threw it, and you had to like put your wide receiver out. And you would think it would just be within that 10 yards, but it could actually, if you held onto that ball long enough, you could get him to run 10, 15, 20, 40 yards down the field. And right, exactly. And then you had to like visualize in your mind, where is this guy? Right. And then you would throw it and it would go all the way out. And so that's why I said I come all the way from the Coleco handheld days of sports. And that was quite, so when I became
back in the era when sports games were just named the sport.
Yeah.
Tennis,
football,
hockey.
But not the Super Nintendo, the regular Nintendo, the NES, had an ice hockey game that I just loved. I love that game. You could pick the skinny guy,
I feel
the
like
fat
everyone
guy.
who played that game loved that game. That was a spectacular one.
The musician for it, the person who made the music, was the same one who did a lot of the more. I forget her name. She doesn't work for Nintendo anymore. She went to go do her own thing. But she was part of some of the more bigger titles that you'd recognize, like in, I think, Mario Kart. I think she did some of the songs in Mario Kart, not all of them, but she did one of them in Mario Kart. And, but you can always recognize her sound. And she did the music for that one. So it was pretty neat, so, but that one was great because you could do like a thick guy, a thick boy, an average sized guy, and a real thin one. And the thin one was super fast. The average was just average. And then your thick boy was just a brute. They were slower, but you could have like 4 of them and they could just bully the rink around. And they would get into fights and things. It was great. It was a lot of fun. That's definitely one that if I was homesick, that's what I was playing. That and track and field. I love track and field. I was a big track and field person myself.
Yeah.
I ran the 200. 200 was my sport. That was my jam. But I didn't do hurdles. I hated the 400. I love the 200.
Well, the 400 is notoriously the most miserable of races.
Yeah.
There's no fun to be had in that.
Yeah, the 100-meter dash, for me, like a lot of people could compete in that. We were all pretty good. But the 200, like 150, people started dying. And so I was really good through that 200. But then after that, I was spitting. So 400 was not fun.
No, you need to be a special breed of masochist to enjoy the 400.
Yeah. They always had me on the mile relay, which is the 400. And I was like the last leg of that. And I hate it. Because it's the last thing of the day. And I hated that so much. I had so much. It wasn't that I was nervous, but I had the butterflies in my because I was tired. I was like, I don't want to do this. But yeah, I love track. So I played the track and field game on the NES too. And those are my favorite games by far. Like I've played Madden, I've done all those, but those NES days are really my favorite days of the sports games. But Con, let's talk about your history.
Some of my earliest gaming memories are defined by sports games. The very first game that I can distinctly remember playing, or probably more watching my brother play, was on the ZX Spectrum, and it was the Sport of Kings, which was a horse racing game. And I don't think you actually controlled anything. I think it was just sort of apply bets before the races, and that was all. But that's one of my very first. Yeah, what a game.
Yeah, your favorite sports game is gambling.
This explains so much.
I thought you were going to say water polo. Sport of Kings.
No.
Sport of Kings, exploitation.
From then on, I think what I really love about sports games is, for me, they became almost the definition of couch gaming. And I think they're one of the few genres where that still often holds up, is most sports games will offer you that possibility to play versus a friend. Just there, same room, on the couch. Whereas we know most games now will lean more towards offering an online multiplayer component, if any at all. So, for me, there was just a string of games where it was all about playing with friends. I wouldn't play many of these on my own. So, my earliest days, this would have been the NHL 1994 game, which would have been on the Sega Genesis or Sega Mega Drive. The early iterations of FIFA and Pro Evolution Soccer, which was sort of a big rivalry in soccer video gaming. You have the rugby Jonah Lomu game as well. And these are my very, very fond memories of specific sporting video games and also international track and field. And I can still remember the thumbs doing X and circles, sprinting on the PlayStation for the 100 meters and just desperately trying to break that 10-second barrier. I can still remember just the pain in the thumbs, and everyone had their own way. Some people it was the 2-thumb approach, some people it was the 2 fingers. I knew a friend who used to put his thumb in his shirt and then run that back and forth over the X and circle together. And it was always trying to, find a way with your friends to find a new way to beat your last time on that. And yeah, I love them. Sports games for me, they have always been a part of my gaming. They still are. To this day, I will play the UFC games. To this day, I will play the modern editions of what is now, I think, called EAFC, which is the spiritual successor to FIFA. And the one that I didn't mention and probably should have And it's the thing that's always made a mockery for me of anyone into sports calling gamers nerds is management games. I love me some Football Manager, and I will say that to this day I have never played a more nerdy spreadsheety game than Football Manager. I think that is just an absolute joy. So that's my sporting gaming history.
Yeah, as a testament to how well those games are designed is that they still exist. They still put out new versions of those games to this day. But I think we talked about earlier that they're adding certain elements that we don't like in those games, like some of those 3D stuff that were kind of, you can see what your player or help your player along with your assistance versus actually just trying to manage them and letting some randomness take over.
That's where I would lean into. So in football gaming or soccer gaming, there's really two big traditions. There's the Championship Manager, Football Manager tradition, which is the spreadsheet game. And then there's the FIFA and Pro Evolution Soccer tradition, where you pick up the controller and you play as the 11 players or as your one player, whatever the case may be. A little shout out, by the way, to a game that I don't think gets the props it deserves for being surprisingly historical. There was a game on the PlayStation 1 which had you playing as one player on your football team. One, which FIFA eventually did in around 2009, 2010. But this one game back on the PS1 called Libero Grande, you played as one player on the team, and it was crap. But in hindsight, I love that they were about 10 or 12 years ahead of the curve for something they couldn't really do at the time, but I love that ambition. And that game comes to me sometimes. So we've got those two traditions, the spreadsheet management tradition, and you've got the gameplay tradition. I don't like where the twain meet. Sadly, I just like to have those two defined experiences. If you like it, good for you. But for me, I don't enjoy managing teams on the FIFA game. I don't like doing my transfers, picking my ideal team, giving the motivational pep talks and all that stuff if I'm just going to be controlling the game afterwards. I want to do the transfers, motivational pep talks, etc., and then see how my little artificial players react to that. So that probably makes me a bit of a Philistine, bit of a Luddite, but I like those two traditions kept nice and separately when I'm playing my games. Although I do like both of them.
Yeah, they work well the way they are, so no need to really make it more complicated than it needs to be.
Simultaneously, people love them.
Yeah,
So
maybe
we're wrong.
We're wrong. We're probably wrong.
Yeah, I don't know that's. I think that's just one of those things where a studio might see, the market share of games that are that kind of more arcade focused sports game where you're playing as the 11 players or whatever, and then trying to expand into that market from their more management oriented game. And it's tough to evaluate games as games without taking into consideration the business decisions that are made. But we also don't get to see that business motivation explicitly stated in games. Like, hey, we're going to add this management mode into FIFA because we want more money. So I think we just kind of have to evaluate it at face value, and I pretty much completely agree. I don't need both of those in a game, one or the other, and then just make sure you do that one thing very well. Because it's a lot easier to screw things up when you keep putting more stuff and completely different stuff in your game.
Yeah, because you're used to seeing one thing that you're doing and then having to switch gears in your head. It could work, but for me, it doesn't.
Yeah, I wonder if it might be a generational thing as well. We grew up very much with them as separate games, separate ideas, and maybe it just is a little bit harder for us to put them together, or we're so used to it that we know what we like. And it's a bit like with music. Where I am now in life, I very rarely listen to new artists and new bands because I sort of feel like, well, I've been alive for this long. I know who I like, and I'm going to listen to that forever. And it's very hard to convince me to sort of try anything really new in that regard. So maybe it's just that.
Let's play Final Fantasy VII again.
Yes!
We're kind of like the the cavemen with the rock, right? But there's nouveau rock. We're not into nouveau rock.
I don't need rock version 2.
Nailed it the first time.
Yeah.
But also, on kind of like the polar opposite of that, I think there's certain developers that tend to really capture the spirit, I think probably better than most of the games you would think out there, like EA Madden and EA the show and things like that. The modern sports games, I have nothing wrong. I like them actually, but I think Nintendo, and I've said this before to you guys off stream, I think Nintendo might be the best developer for sports games, because not only are those games that I mentioned, which are, older games, but they came out with Mike Tyson Punch-Out. They had all those wrestling games. They had all those Wii Sports, which was huge. And they still come out, like even Mario Kart, I could argue, is a sports game. So you say you don't do PvP or co-op, but there's one that everybody's played.
I was going to ask, where do we draw the lines between party games and sports games? Because, I mean, when you look at what a sport actually is, there's really not a difference between just making up a bunch of rules for some activity and playing a sport.
Sure, but I mean, there's a certain concept there, especially like with the Wii Sports, what they did with the backyard stuff and this and that. So a lot of them, they didn't have to be co-op. Like, you can play against the computer and whatnot, but you're playing tennis, you're playing baseball, whatever. And but like I said, I think Nintendo might have captured the spirit of sports better than any other developer, at least my opinion. But
I think I wouldn't agree completely, but I think there are exceptions to that. And the one I can think of is the world, and I implore developers, and there's one in development right now which I've got cautious optimism for. We are deprived of a good rugby game. We're absolutely deprived. There isn't one. I know you've been trying, but it's been bad. Fix it. The best rugby game is Mario and Sonic Rugby Sevens. It is an incredible rugby game. And that blew me away. And I still think that Mario Tennis is a fine tennis game. Yes, we lack certain simulation aspects, but it just brings the fun of that sport and makes it so damn accessible. I don't think... Go on.
I was just going to say, I think Nintendo captures the fun aspect of every sport and makes that its priority, whereas other games, like you'll see with, EA's involvement in football and American football, it's they're focusing on the realism, and they're doing a decent job, but Nintendo abandons that realism to prioritize fun, and that's what makes all of their games kind of stand out for me. So when I played Mario and Sonic, the Olympic game, God, do I not care if that's realistic. I'm playing as Vex the Crocodile. Like, I don't need it to be realistic. I just need it to be fun. And there's not even a ton of like tremendous fine skill in that game, which you'll need in, say, Madden or FIFA. It's mostly just button mashing as fast as you can, or occasionally like precision controls. But it's so much fun. And Nintendo really stands out for me as a developer that prioritizes making their games fun when they approach sports games, and they are willing to sacrifice the things that I'm not super concerned about in sports games.
I think this is where, for me, I would have my only... It's not a critique of them, but it's their time and a place. If I want to sit down and play one game for half an hour, 45 minutes, 1 hour, I think it's the perfect sports game for that. In that case, give me Mario and Sonic Rugby Sevens. Give me the track and field Nintendo version, the Olympics game. Give me that. Give me Wii Sports. Perfect. But I wouldn't want to spend a whole day doing it in the way that I have done with Football Manager, in the way that I have done with classic FIFA. I think when I'm playing just for longer, I do need, for me personally, that sense of realism, that simulation aspect, which isn't present in those games because they don't want it to be. And that is perfectly fine. And I love that both of those game types exist because it means I can have either. I don't want to live in a world where there's only Mario and Sonic Rugby Sevens. I don't want to live in a world where there's only Football Spreadsheet Simulator. I want to live in a world with both of them, and we do.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, I mean, even to a certain extent, I feel like the Mario Party games fall into that category of sports games almost. They're little action games. And if you try to play like Mario Party, the career mode that they've put in where like you unlock everything, it's not something that I can sit down and just grind away at for hours and hours. And that's my thing. That's what I do. I play Final Fantasy games. I grind for days without sleeping or eating. I'm a pro. But it just doesn't work for Nintendo games for some reason. I couldn't play Mario Party for 8 hours straight. I couldn't play Mario Kart for 8 hours straight. I might be able to play Punch Out for 8 hours straight, but that's just because I'm terrible.
Yeah.
It should take me an hour and a half to beat that game. It doesn't.
No. The original Punch Out was it's still considered like one of the hardest games. And I was like, I beat that when I was a kid. I mean, it was just a pattern recognition thing back then. But that was me back then. I couldn't tell you now that I could do it. So
Punch Out versus Super Punch Out was also a big change of pace because the original Punch Out had a lot of RNG in it, if I remember correctly. I remember it being kind of like you needed to take your chances and throw punches when you didn't really know what was going to happen. Whereas Super Punch Out is very much that pattern recognition. You have to wait and counter and basically recognize the patterns of your opponent's attacks and respond appropriately.
Yeah, I could be completely wrong, but I think that was more of the arcade version because they wanted you to spend more quarters on it.
I feel like the arcade version was more the RNG because if you could recognize the patterns, you could beat the game and not spend as much money. Whereas if the patterns were randomized, you were more likely to lose. And I definitely remember, I mean, this is years ago at this point, going to Barcade in Philly and playing Punch Out, and it was a completely different experience than I remember playing on my NES. It's like, this isn't the same game.
Yeah. Another little inclusion of Mario. He was the ref, so
that's true. It was interesting that it was a Nintendo game where Mario was involved and was not the main character or like really that important
in there at all.
Because I mean, there were no rules in Super Punch Out. People headbutted me, they spit in my eye. Like Mario didn't do shit in that game. It just appeared.
Like all the enforcement powers of a WWE referee.
Yeah. Just constantly distracted at the ropes the entire fight.
Yeah. Then Mike Tyson Punch Out was just kind of perfect for its time because Mike Tyson as a person was rising as a character in real life. I mean, just before that, I mean, he was an up and comer. He wasn't like the champion that we knew him, right? He was just dominating. If you saw him back in the day,
he was just a terrifying human being.
And so when Nintendo approached him for that, which you don't see like Tony Hawk skateboarding back then. It didn't happen back then. That was the only title I knew of that included a popular sports figure or any figure.
I think one of the first games where it was no longer just tennis. It was, Mike Tyson's Punch Out as opposed to Punch Out. I agree. That was one of the first times I remember seeing that, where it's like, let's associate this with a celebrity in this sport. And then that kind of became the norm afterwards. Tiger Woods PGA Tour for a long time, and then he did some stuff. But
yeah, and the characters were fun in that game, but notoriously racist now. Like you wouldn't be able to make that game again. But
they did remake it not too long ago.
True, but there was a lot of characters that they reused. So I think the Russian guy was the same.
Soda Popinski.
He
was.
Okay. But he was also, I think they used him twice.
I didn't just make that up. That's his name.
Right. But they used him as a different nationality. That's what I was saying. It was like it was the same moveset, not the same moveset necessarily, but it was the same character build and stuff he did. They just said a different thing at the beginning.
That might be. But I know, so I think one of the reasons that the Punch-Out games kind of got a pass on that like absurd racism was because it was almost farcical. It was almost like this is how stupid racism actually is. Look at how absurd we're being with these stereotypes. This is what you all sound like when you say racist stuff. And like, I completely agree with that. Like there's no logic to racism. So if you want to point out how stupid it is by just taking it to its logical extreme, I'm on board. So
another bold stance for the podcast. We are against racism.
Yeah. This is going to be that one time where our standard advice of if you do it well doesn't apply.
I think the Spanish fighter had a rose in his mouth.
Don Flamenco.
Yeah, Don Flamenco. Yeah, he was dancing the flamenco,
and he had a toupee.
Yeah, it was just over
wonderful.
the top. Yeah,
I love those games. That was one of the first games I streamed. Super Punch-Out.
Mm-hmm.
There was not a category for it on Twitch, so I think I put it as boxing, which was wrong. I should have put it as retro. But like, I think I got a lot of confused people because I didn't know Twitch very well at the time either. But a lot of people were like, this is not what I thought I was going to be watching.
Yeah, but you're here now, buddy.
Yeah. There's been a lot of wrestling games too. I don't know if, again, we're not going into like, what is it, a sport or not, but I think we could classify that as far as a sports game, for a video game. Those are real popular, but they seem to have a specific group that goes into that. Like they don't really make a game kind of like the Nintendo one where it's like really over the top. But it's kind of crazy because you would think wrestling would be the one sport. You have these over the top characters that you just integrate into that video game and just go wild with the information, well, with the creativity.
Well, this is where wrestling video games are in a strange position. To sort of open disclosure, I adore pro wrestling. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. The way that I would normally describe pro wrestling is it's just better than anything you like. It's just better. It's just really good, and you should like it. And it has one very strange
First
idea.
Real bold stance. If you don't like wrestling, you're wrong.
We're not talking about the mud wrestling that you were talking about earlier, right?
They have mud wrestling.
Okay.
Yeah. We're all on the same page. If you don't like that, you're wrong.
That's not every match is mud wrestling, but that is a stipulation. It's a game because when you make it into a video game, you almost take away its one defining characteristic. Wrestling, by its very nature, is a cooperative venture. You don't go out there to hurt each other. Almost the biggest praise that you could offer to a pro wrestler is X wrestler has never injured someone. If you do that, you're almost the model pro wrestler. You're that safe pair of hands that everyone wants to work with. Mm-hmm. And when we turn it into a video game, of course, I don't know how you would go about making a wrestling game which reflected professional wrestling as it is in our world. You have to make it competitive. So is professional wrestling a sport? No. It's entertainment. It's sports entertainment. Is a wrestling video game a sports video game? Yes. Because it has to be, by its very nature, competitive.
Yeah. I think that's the perfect kind of assessment of why wrestling games feel a little off. It's because wrestling is not a competition. Wrestling is a performance. Wrestling is live theater. You don't have live theater video games. That's not a thing. So when you make a wrestling game, you turn it into a sport when it's not really a sport. And that's why they always feel a little off. That being said, they're wonderful. God, I love the character creation in some of those.
Yes.
The absolutely absurd proportions you can make a human being in that game, to the point where like they are just 900 pounds suspended on tiny little toothpicks. It's absolutely hysterical. It is probably not what the developers intended for like my enjoyment of their game, but I don't care. It's hilarious and I love it.
But they let you have that. They know that someone out there is going to do it, so they let you have it. And you can tell by the way that, especially in the older games, the textures map really weirdly on them. If you do that, okay, this clearly wasn't intended, but they still let me.
Yep.
And there's the other thing as well, which to me is just the one thing which is a shame, because The best part about wrestling, when you're actually really watching it, there's 3 bits. The wrestling is the worst part of pro wrestling. The best part is the introductions. So people coming down the ramp with their music. To this day, Triple H's music is my gym music. Every day. And if I'm in the shower, you bet I'm spraying the water like Triple H. No question. No question. Which, bearing in mind I use a communal shower in the gym, is a bit weird for the other guys, but deal with it. The next
As long
best
as they can hear the song, I'm sure they'll understand.
I thought you just used the sink and just bathe right there. So
the second best part is the finishing moves. And the third best part is the microphone performances, all the promos and the drama that exists outside of the matches themselves.
I was gonna say that's the wrestling game we need. Shit talk simulator. Like,
Yeah.
I'm in.
I just don't know how you do the best parts of wrestling in a video game, because the best parts aren't the wrestling. But as Banana said, wrestling games are still wonderful. You can have just the best time with them. And again, to this day, they generally contain a couch element to their gaming as well. So if you need a party game, you can do really, really well. And you also tend to have that they will incorporate legacy matches, legacy fighters, so you can still play as Stone Cold Steve Austin, you can still play as Ric Flair, Bret Hart, etc.
I've never seen this guy named John Cena. I've never seen him.
No one has.
I think the personalities are so big in wrestling, though. That's what kind of also makes it hard for those video games, because you want to make your own character. And yeah, I mean, you can, but really you're so tied to the characters that people know now that I think it handicaps those developers to a point. But it also helps them because, you know, it's a so-and-so's likeness is on our game. So,
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like I was watching somebody play through. I'm not going to get the name right. It might have been like WWE Superstars or something like that. And there's like a story mode, and it's like your progression through the ranks of the WWE, like coming in as brand new. And it feels weird because wrestling is so over the top to put like a story element into a game like that, where it's just like nobody is behaving like a human being anymore. Nobody's being even the slightest bit rational. And we're going to tell a story around that. It feels really weird. And it's because wrestling is naturally so over the top. Like, how do you do that in a video game and make it feel normal? Because there's nothing normal about the way people interact in wrestling.
That's always the great thing against it, isn't it? If this thankfully happens very rarely, but once in a blue moon, you will get someone asking you, do you know it's fake? Yeah, figured this out about 75 years ago, and I'm not 75 years old. If I wanted that to be real, I've got a major problem. Do I want to live in the world where they've had a disagreement, so now someone's hitting someone in the face with a chair? Do I want to live in a world where we resolve our problems with a casket match? What does that even mean?
Yeah, but it's better to let the people believe that you believe that it's real. Like,
it's much more fun.
Yeah,
much more fun.
My grandfather was a huge wrestling fan, and so I only watched it with him.
Oh,
but
Texas wrestling back in the day.
Well, Andre the Giant was the only one I kept up with, and when he passed away, because he was that epitome of the extremeness of the sport. Like nobody could beat Andre the Giant, in my opinion. Nobody could, and yet they could. So it kind of brought in this like a duality of thought, like how ridiculous the sport really can be. And so when he died, I just didn't really keep up with it at all.
Yeah,
but you know.
Yeah, I love the idea of the larger than life. No one personified it better than he did. Are we now an Andre the Giant memorial stream? Because we're late to the party, but I'm very much on board, and I want this to be what we're doing.
Yeah, no, I'm okay with this.
Everyone say your favorite memory of Andre the Giant.
Princess Bride.
Yeah, I was going to say it's.
Oh, come on,
Princess Bride.
In the ring.
Yeah. Oh, okay. But probably the Hulk Hogan match. You know, because that was supposed to be the end all be all. You know,
Body Slam. WrestleMania 3, I think.
But I feel like Andre the Giant is like that perfect representation of how this is like the real life equivalent of comic books almost,
Yeah.
where like you have these almost superhuman figures, and when you think about it, there's really no way that anybody should compete with them. Anybody who's just, your average guy, and then they write plot armor in, and it makes it somehow more entertaining, despite the fact that if you thought about it for 3 seconds, you'd be like, Andre wins. The end. But it's still very fun to just sit there and like listen to this absolutely preposterous story play out. And I think that element of it doesn't get captured in video games as much.
Well, video games are defined by larger than life characters. There's nothing unique about your wrestlers being larger than life.
Mhm.
In real life, when you watch sports, and this is the problem that something like the UFC would have. The UFC, for example, right now, the one of the champions is a man called Bilal Muhammad, and he is an incredibly capable fighter, but he generally is perceived as being boring in the cage. So it's a lot of grappling as opposed to striking. I actually very much like him, but that's what we say. We do tend to like strikers more. It's more exciting, the idea that someone could get suddenly knocked out. It's why we love Alex Pereira, we love Max Holloway, we love Justin Gaethje. Bilal Muhammad, seen as more conservative. And also outside the ring, he's not that vocal. He's not that trash talky. He's a bit now since he became champion. But for years, people have thought he deserves a title shot if this is on merit. He clearly deserves one. And you were seeing fighters ahead of him in the ranks getting title shots who just were more interesting. They were clearly worse fighters, but they were just more interesting. They had a bigger personality. They were willing to trash talk. They were willing to do all of that. And that's almost the foundation of being a professional wrestler, is it doesn't matter how good you are. That is pure. How can you sell yourself? How can you make yourself sound? How interesting can you be? And it's what makes it, for me, despite I love the UFC, I love mixed martial arts. That's what always keeps the love in my heart for pro wrestling is that performative aspect.
Well, I'm glad you went that direction because I was just about to bring up that type of sport. So I clearly believe that is a sport. There's no question about it. But I don't really think the integration of that in video games really works well because it's unless you have just like a mindset. Because really the closest a tie that makes it fun would be like the Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat games. And I wouldn't call those sport games, probably just action fighting games, right? But I mean, I guess we could loosely tie them. But that's why I wanted to ask you guys if you kind of considered those sports games, because that's really essentially a UFC fight out in the open.
Well, so I'm glad we got into this topic because I was going to bring that up as well. Like, I feel like those combat sports, things like wrestling and the UFC and all of the sports in that kind of category don't translate well to video games when you include that realism. When you take that realism out, they become a lot more fun. And I think that's almost the difference between UFC and wrestling for me is trash talk in UFC is infuriating to me. Just shut up. You're fighters. You're earning a paycheck. I don't care about your personal beefs with each other. Whereas in wrestling, that was so much fun because it was so over the top. It was so very clearly not real that it was just fun to engage in. But in UFC, it's like, oh, well, now I've learned that this entertainer is also an asshole. Now I want them to lose despite the fact that they are competing in something they've trained their entire lives for.
It's also not the good kind of want you to lose.
Yeah.
It's not the I'm gonna enjoy watching the other person finally take you down. It's no, I want to see you lose. I just want to see
I don't
your
want
face
somebody
get
to be better than you. I just want to see you unhappy. And that's really what it comes down to when you get into that like too real shit talking. But in games like, Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, they go full over the top again, and now I'm back into it. I'm engaged again, and I know it doesn't make any sense, and I'm willing to forego the realism because it's so much more enjoyable this way. Like if I wanted to play the Dragon Ball games and fight as Yamcha, I should lose every fight to every enemy, regardless of who is picked. But it's possible to win. And that absolute nonsense possibility makes it fun.
And I think to tackle Banana's point and to just answer the original question, I don't think I would count them as sports games. Things like Street Fighter, Tekken, whatever it might be. But it's really hard to concretely define why I don't, because the lines are clearly very, very blurred. So I'm just going to not call them sports because then they don't have that realistic aspect. But I think my approach to, for example, UFC games, which I enjoy, and Street Fighter games, which I love, is probably best done with this clumsy ass analogy. Get ready for it. So in the world of video gaming, we're allowed to live these things that we can't live in our everyday lives, or most people probably won't. I'm sure that you could make, if you really wanted, a great airsoft game. But why would I want that when I could be using real bullets in my game? Why would I want a paintball game when I could have an actual machine gun in-game? And that's almost where I am with these, is I want the most extreme version possible. So I don't want my man just standing there punching up his opponent. I want my man standing 20 feet away punching up his opponent with flying flaming fists that fly off his actual hands and burn the other person. My favorite professional wrestling game was in arcades, and on the, I think, Sega Mega Drive. And it was one that was defined by this cartoonish aspect. The Undertaker's finishing move is the Tombstone Power Driver, where he holds you upside down, drops onto his knees, and spikes your head into the mat. In this video game, his move was the Tombstone, which meant that he pulled a spiritual tombstone out of his back pocket and smashed you over the head with it. That ridiculousness is more what I want in my video games. Because it's the one place we can actually do it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like that fantasy element is almost why we play video games. And we talked about it with simulators. Like, I don't need the perfect analogy for this experience if that experience exists in the real world. I don't need House Flipper to be back-breaking work. I need it to be fun. And that's why I play those games. And I think that the same is true for sports games. Like you were saying, I agree. I don't think Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat or Tekken, Soul Calibur, I don't think any of those count as sports games. But they're fun. And they're a fantasy version of sports games. I mean, I fairly recently got into Blood Bowl. I love that game.
So good.
That is not an actual sport.
Right.
Thank God.
But
I love that game.
Well, describe the sport, because not everybody may know what you're talking about.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. So Blood Bowl is very, very similar to American football. However, you can kill people. So like you are basically encouraged to hit people always. People who don't have the ball, hit them. People who are in the stands, hit them. Just whatever is nearby, hit it as hard as you can. That is almost the entire point of Blood Bowl. But there is a ball, and you try to get it into an end zone. And that is how scores actually calculated.
And your teams are like monsters and stuff too, right? Or they can be.
Oh,
right?
yeah, it's all very fantasy setting. So I think there's an overlap with certain IPs there.
I believe it is a Warhammer Fantasy IP. Or
Okay,
Games
I was
Workshop
going
IP.
to say I feel like it's Warhammer, although the ones that I've played are not my modern familiarity with Warhammer. There's no Space Marines or anything like that. But the Skaven are in there. There's a lot of kind of traditional fantasy elements, elven teams, halfling teams, orcs, ogres, things like that. And they represent kind of different units on the field. So you could just go with like a whole elven team, and everybody kind of looks a little similar, and they have different roles. But if you go with one of the more like brutal looking races like orcs, you'll probably have one or two ogres on your team, and they will stand out dramatically as just brutal, vicious units that maybe don't play as much of a finesse or scoring oriented role. But I think that fantasy element of it is what makes that really fun. Because if I saw a bunch of human beings just beating the crap out of each other in this kind of game, I feel like it wouldn't be as fun for me. It'd be like, oh, this is just war over a football.
And that's funny because that's where the crossover becomes fun, is when it's that fantastical side. Whereas what you were talking about with House Flipper, can you imagine a pop-up that said, well, you broke your wrist, and now you have to like spend 30 days not fixing things, and now you have a $5,000 retro bill.
Fill out these forms and send them to OSHA.
Yeah, and a $50,000 medical bill, and you have to like pay that. Now you got to do more House Flipper. That's stupid.
Achievement unlocked, sciatica.
I was like, uninstall.
Permanent life-altering injury.
I think that's where the simulation game point that we got to a while back was. There was another little nuance with it. Was the simulation game, we don't want it to really be down to the detail, especially if it's something I can achieve in everyday life. A pilot, I can't be a pilot, or I don't have the skill, it's not likely. So that I want to be nice and detailed, weirdly enough. But I probably could be a house flipper if I really wanted to. I probably, and a bit of luck, I could go and power wash, for example. I could go and wash down my kitchen. That, a bit of a softer simulation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where that fun really lies there. A little side note, and this was from Blood Bowl. So it being a Warhammer IP, it being a Games Workshop IP, I do find it very, very interesting that that's one of the UK's great modern cultural exports, is Games Workshop, Warhammer, and Warhammer 40,000. Then that's an utterly fascinating idea that when you look across cultures in the last century especially, so you see the Great Rise of America is in its soft power form. So not the hard power, but the soft power form. So you have things like Coca-Cola, you have things like Blue Jeans, McDonald's, etc. You had the UK with its music, particularly in the 60s, the 70s, and more modern. But you have the new wave of British heavy metal. You've got the Beatles, you've got the Stones, and so forth. I'm fascinated by the idea that its great modern export might be a miniatures game. It's a wonderful idea. Like a true great UK success story is the nerdiest stuff you can imagine. I love that. I wanted to, by the way.
I hear Oasis came back.
Yeah, they've. I haven't got tickets, but they have just announced that they're reuniting. And by the way, if anyone does want to watch the real life equivalent of a fighting game, go to one of those gigs and you've got a chance. I wanted to ask a question about sports games and whether or not and how, to what extent, they can function as gateways to real sport. So was there a game, for example, that you played as a kid that made you want to go and take part in that sport? Or maybe just made you want to watch the sport, helped you begin to understand the rules somewhat?
My timeline is a bit skewed because I was already in sports pretty deep from the time I was about 7. And I got my Nintendo closer to 10, 11, something like that. So it only fully ingrained me in those sports more. So I was already playing baseball. You got to understand, in Texas, I mean, baseball and football, you grow up with a bat in your hand and a football in the other. So that's kind of what I did. But yeah, playing those games on those formats just was kind of like a nice little escape too, because rather than it, because it was always, for me, it was always fun. It was never like, I gotta be the best at this. Me and Com have talked about this before. I'm not super competitive when it comes to a team sport. I will do my part and I will give you more than 100% if possible. But at the end of the day, I can't control what the team does, but playing it on a video game was a great escape because it didn't have that pressure that maybe I would have felt otherwise. So it just helped me still love the sport without getting burnt out on it. So probably it did. My little preteen mind probably was helped by that.
I don't know if there was any sport game that got me more into a sport. And I think part of that is because I have played pretty much every sport for a team, with a few exceptions. Never played cricket, never played rugby. I don't know if rugby is just a cultural thing, or like you said, the fact that there is no good rugby video game. Maybe if there was, I'd be more into the sport. But cricket, I know, is not particularly popular in the US. And I've never played any cricket video games as well. So, but hockey, football, soccer, baseball, basketball. Played them all for a team at one point. So playing a sports video game really couldn't have gotten me into the sport. But I do notice that like there were certain sports games that I was more interested than watching the actual sport. For me, watching soccer, football was not particularly interesting. It was never something I could do. Pretty much when I was a kid, whenever I would watch it on TV, I would lose interest and just go outside and play soccer instead. And that's kind of what ended up happening with video gaming is like, I don't want to watch this game. I'll go play a video game that resembles this. Whereas football, for whatever reason, I could watch all day on Sunday. Like, I don't know why.
Football Americano.
Sorry, American football.
Okay.
As far as my experience with video gaming, like I think along the same lines with Legion, I was kind of already into the sports that I was going to consider. And then the sports that I was not involved in were kind of things I wouldn't find as popular in the area where I was.
Yeah.
I see a slightly different answer, which I think generally I would agree. I don't think any game put me into a sport that I had otherwise not wanted to play. So, for example, the sports I mainly played when I was a kid. So, soccer was the game that I always played, and this is just talking team games now. There was rugby that was present in schools, and that's very much a cultural thing. So, if you're from a few very specific countries, and there are more, but if you're from Wales, France, England, Ireland, North or Republic, if you're from New Zealand, South Africa, if you're from Australia, you have probably played rugby or some variant at some point. And me coming from one of those, it's unsurprising. But I think these were all games I was playing. So when I was playing rugby, when I was playing FIFA, when I was playing whatever it was, I was playing games that were already sports I played. Despite that, I'm 90% sure that my interest in martial arts came from Tekken. Which is not a sports game. I think that was the one that opened the door for me. Although I can tell you one tiny little story about someone else, which I thought was delightful. So, another current UFC champion, it's not a real title, it's called the BMF belt, is Max Holloway. Max Holloway, when growing up, when learning martial arts, a way that he learned to fight, partially, not exclusively, was playing the UFC video game. And he would play the first UFC game, and if a combo worked in the game, he would go to the gym the next time and then learn that combo. Because he figured, well, if it worked in the game, it must work in real life. And he's one of the participating, most successful fighters, one of the best records. And he has that one little bit of him, which is directly thanks to playing these UFC video games.
Yeah. You mentioned Wales, UK, and New Zealand, but apparently the panhandle of Texas too, because when I was a kid, that's what we played before school started and after school, because we didn't want to have a quarterback. We didn't want to kick field goals in our leisure time. We played rugby. So we actually played rugby on our recess time. So we did it, and I loved it. That's where I learned that I had a lot more leg strength than most.
I love this idea, by the way, that because we did something similar. So for you, there was the idea, well, there's no brutality for the quarterback. Let's get rid of that and just have lines of people running at each other. We did the same thing, but we just went from another step. So we were already playing rugby. And we said, well, we don't need the ball. We can just run into each other.
Like, Red Rover, let's come on
Nobody's
over.
keeping score anyway.
All right. Well, we've talked plenty about sports, and I'm pretty sure like most of these topics, we'll probably circle around to it at some point. But appreciate everybody being here today. And of course, if you are not subscribed to the channel, please do that. Hit the alert button so you know when we get a new video out. And we are also on Apple, Amazon, and Spotify for the audio broadcasts. And check those out if you can, please. But we will see you next time. Thank you very much.